Our guest today on Caribbeana is a community leader, activist, Ako Mutota. And he is from Trinidad. He's known for his work in social justice, advocacy for Caribbean unity. And we're discussing a little bit of regional politics and the consequences, and from CARICOM's leadership to the shifting geopolitical dynamics shaping the Caribbean unity. Quite a state we are in today, Ako. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for inviting me to be on your program.
Right.
Um, Always good to see you.
Yes, man. Yes, yes, yes. You know, you've been active in advocacy and community organizing for many years. How have those experiences shaped your understanding of politics at the regional level?
So I have been directly involved in politics. I was a member of the National Joint Action Committee for close to 20 years, which, um, is popularly called the Black Power movement.
Right.
So I've been involved from, a teenager for close to 20 years. And I held senior positions in the National Joint Action Committee, in the executive,
Right. Right.
and had the opportunity to travel abroad, both in the Caribbean and outside of the Caribbean, to North
Yeah.
America,
Yeah.
to represent the organization at international fora and also to engage in organizations both in the Caribbean and in North America. So
Right.
that has shaped my perspective
Right.
on politics, the revolutionary organization.
Right.
And then later on, we became a political party and participated in three elections during my time, general
Yes.
elections, that is. So
Yeah.
that is where my political and ideological leanings would have been shaped and influenced.
Right. Right.
I was speaking.
In today's time, what do you think are the biggest political challenges facing the Caribbean region right now?
Well, my initial response to that question would be what I've said for a very long time, especially in the last few years, whenever I've been interviewed, that the fundamental problem, in my opinion, that confronts the Caribbean today is the process, in that we have not decolonized, despite the fact Tobago and Jamaica,
Yeah.
we got independence in the 1960s, Trinidad in 1962. And we were supposed to have shed the relics of colonialism, but in fact, we have not. Our institutions remain tethered to the, the former colonial power, which is Britain.
Right. Right.
Our political systems, our judicial systems, of our ways of engaging in politics is still influenced by that colonial process. So I have
Mhm.
always, especially in the last couple of years, I've always stated that I disagree with those thinkers and theorists who have expressed the position that we're in a post-colonial state. We are in fact not in a post-colonial state. We're in a neo-colonial state. It is
Mhm.
akin to what has happened in the US when Barack Obama won the elections and we started bandying about this term, a post-racial society.
Yeah.
America
Yeah.
is not a post-racial society. And the Caribbean is not in a post-colonial state in the exception of Cuba. We are
Right.
not in a post-colonial state. We are neo-colonial states.
Yeah.
And this is what we have to understand when engaging the politics of the Caribbean.
What do you think are the biggest political challenges facing the Caribbean region right now?
Well, number one, disunity, right? But again, that is also connected to our history. Number two, the economic challenges that we have. And number three, possibly what I hinted earlier, the fact that we have institutions that do not serve our interest. And I don't know which one comes first or second, but you may look at the economics and say, okay, that is first. You may look at the disunity and say that is first.
Yeah.
And then you may look at the whole structure of the institutions, which in itself is possibly the greatest impediment to our advancement as a people. You
Right.
know, I would recall what Deng Xiaoping, the late leader of China, said. When asked if China was capitalist or communist, he replied, "What does it matter if a cat is black or white? What matters is catching rats." You know, in
Yeah.
other words, he was speaking to institutions that function, function in a way that was effective in delivering whatever
Right.
goals
Right.
society set. Right?
Right. Right. Right.
You
Right.
talk about functionality and the utilitarian nature of of institutions,
Yeah.
and those should be utilized to serve the society's advancement.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so when we look at the Caribbean, possibly one of the things I would think maybe number one is the fact that we are still engaging and functioning in what I call fossilized and ossified institutions, with fossilized and ossified institutions, whether
Right.
they be
Right. Right.
political, economic, or otherwise.
Right. 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 So we were built on this economic dream, a dream of economic and political integration. And do you think that exists at all? Do you think that dream is still alive?
Well, integration, the fact that the federation collapsed meant that we really didn't practice integration.
Right. Right.
The fact that we invented something called CARIFTA, the Caribbean Free Trade Area,
Right.
and never really developed that into any
Tangible.
significant kinds of
Yeah.
trade.
Yeah.
And then later on, we spoke about things like CARICOM, the Caribbean Community Market, and CARICOM. And to some extent, what was happening is that the dominant sectors of the economy, which we do not control, right? In order to develop a common market and all those kinds of institutions that we're referring to, we had to control our economies, what we refer to in NJAC as the commanding heights of the economy, in order to develop any real, what you may call, market of our own, any indigenous market.
Right.
What
Right.
we in fact were doing was trading in what I call tertiary and secondary sectors of the economy, and not at the level of the commanding heights of the economy.
Right. Right.
So, so we have sold, our leadership have sold us a lot of stories, lies, if you want to prefer it, ideas that have no real validity. And so this is what you see demonstrated, for example, in the recent impasse between Trinidad and the rest of CARICOM over the United States presence in the Caribbean relative to its
Venezuela.
terrorizing of the Venezuelan society.
Yeah. 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 What could be done to make CARICOM and regional bodies more accountable and relevant to ordinary people?
Well, Brother Vaughan, there's a Calypso Gabi song called West Indian Politician. And in one of the lines in that Calypso, he basically said, "You're killing me with Westminster." Right? The Westminster system of parliamentary democracy, which is supposed to be representative democracy, has not worked even in the United Kingdom. And here we imported this thing. It was given to us, and then we embrace it through the elites of the Caribbean. And we refuse, even in the face of that reality of the disunity and the dysfunctional nature of the system, we refuse even to consider changing it. So that is something that stares us in the face. I mean, one of the main reasons, for example, of the movement in Trinidad, led by NJAC, coming to the fore, and especially with its appeal to young people,
Yeah.
was the fact that we advocated for a different political and economic order. We have a booklet we wrote called Conventional Politics or Revolution.
Yeah.
And in that booklet, we ask whether the existing systems of politics really serve the population, or whether do we need a different system, which was revolutionary because it was diametrically opposed to what we have, which is this
Right.
model of participatory democracy. And what we advocated at the time was for a system of not participatory, representative democracy. And what we advocated for was a system of participatory democracy. And we developed a concept called the People's Parliaments. From Grenada, for example, they
Right.
referred to it as the People's Assembly. So the
Right.
idea was that, and the existing history and demonstrative, and clearly demonstrated was that the system did not work, in that it did not deliver to the people. And
Right.
therefore, we challenged that and said, okay, we need something different. And
Right.
for
Right.
that, we were victimized. For that, we were terrorized by the state, and so on and so forth. And the
Right.
case of Grenada, the experiment failed before it even got off the ground.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, boy. If you would reimagine Caribbean unity and regional politics for the next 25 years, what would it look like?
Well, it would have to be that we look at what we have in terms of our own values, our own history, our own ideas of politics and social evolution. It would
Right.
have to be that we begin to develop institutions around that history and those experiences that we have had as a people.
Right.
Looking also at our indigenous history as Indians, Africans, indigenous. One of the things, I was in a lecture one time with the Haitian historian, by Bello, and she said from her understanding of Haitian history,
Yeah.
said that the cacique was not necessarily a king. Well, her research suggests that the cacique was an institution, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
based on the European construct of how they interpret history and society, they saw the cacique as this single individual.
Yes. Yes.
But the
Yes.
fact is that these indigenous societies, even though they may have had kings and other kinds of regents, there was a system of communal approaches to things.
Right. Right.
And so that is part of our history, whether we're from India or in Africa. There's this Congolese scholar, Wunsheki Fukia, who speaks about the Mbongi as a
Right.
political system, which is a collective way of solving problems.
Right.
And
Right.
so that has been part of our history before we came to the Caribbean. And it's also been part of the indigenous history. So any political system would have to begin with the ideas of our own civilization.
Right. 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 Very interesting. Let's change a little before we conclude. Regional resilience and disaster response. We recently experienced Hurricane Melissa, which caused widespread damage, across several of the Caribbean islands, especially Jamaica. What's your reaction to how this disaster has impacted communities across the region? I know
Well,
Jamaica has impacted greatly.
yeah, my reaction is one of sadness and solidarity initially for the people who have been impacted by the hurricane, by the hurricane. And it is, it has really impacted very negatively people in Jamaica, Cuba, and people are forgetting Haiti was
Right.
also impacted very badly by the there are a number of opinions. We know that global warming has contributed to the severity of hurricanes. And in this instance, it is said that this hurricane was the most severe one to ever hit Jamaica in its history. So this harks back again to what I began with earlier, how the colonial processes impacted us. Now, global warming is a product of the industrialized world, the industrialized West. And they are imposing solutions on us that is causing us to be sacrificed in a way that they are not prepared. be
Mm-hmm.
sacrificed in order to change or to reduce the emissions into the environment. So again, it reflects on the colonial or neo-colonial relationship that we have had with the metropolitan or what is called the West. The second thing is that in a capitalist society, which we have embraced, there is a sense of individualism that destroys solidarity. And it is not the first time that we have been hit by disaster, but we had a philosophy where we felt a different sense of solidarity as a people. And that, to a large extent, is have been significantly impacted in a negative way. Now, what we do is we give charity, and charity is not the same as solidarity. And we must make that very, very clear, because the rich will give you solidarity, will give you charity, but that doesn't cost them anything.
Right.
Solidarity is when we have to sacrifice something in order to share the pain, the suffering, and other things with our neighbor and our brothers and sisters and our comrades. So
Right.
in that sense, we need to have a greater sense of solidarity in the Caribbean in order to assist each other.
Right.
And
Right.
the other factor is that we have to improve our infrastructure, because a lot of that devastation is caused by inefficient infrastructure, caused by people who sometimes have the minimum amount of resources in order to provide housing and other kinds of living conditions. And so people put up a little board house, and even where they would put up a cement or a concrete structure, sometimes the roof is not developed according to code because of the level of poverty.
Right.
So
Right.
this is a factor that we have to look at moving forward, because of the changing environment where we have more earthquakes, it seems, in the Caribbean, and where we have more severe hurricanes. We
Right.
certainly have to look at how we improve our infrastructure codes in order to cope with these changing and the changing circumstances relative to the environment.
Right, and that has to happen. That has to take hold throughout the entire Caribbean. Well, listen,
Exactly.
man, this has been so nice. But before I go, I couldn't leave without, you know, bringing up the question of U.S., Venezuela, and CARICOM. Trinidad is seen by some, interpreted by some, it's in a negative sense, a negative light. How do you see this thing playing out?
Well, as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, I'm very embarrassed by the handling of this situation by the current
Congress?
government.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the current government and prime minister. We have always had what I would call a relatively measured um, foreign policy. Okay, um, if you look at, for example, the positions George Chambers took on the Grenada situation when the U.S. was pressurizing, um, him
Right.
to act in a certain way, and he took a very what I would call relatively progressive position and courageous position.
Yeah.
Likewise, Errol Barrow in Barbados, and he cited the fact that the United States could not lecture Barbados on um, democracy, because he
Right.
spoke about the Barbados House Assembly, how old it was, and was one of the longest continuous institutions of democracy.
Yeah.
Of course, we had the case of Tom Adams, and before and also Eugenia Charles, who sided and was in lockstep with the U.S.
Ronald Reagan.
policy.
Right.
Um, and this harks back to that. How I see this, to be honest with you, I see the response of the current government and the utterance of the prime minister as rooted in ignorance, right? Ignorance, a kind of ethnocentric kind of ideological position without taking into consideration the entire Caribbean.
Hmm.
And also um, what I would call the colonial mentality. that in this day and age, if as a leader, any leader, political leader in the Caribbean, if you do not understand what U.S. foreign policy is, then something is wrong. You are not fit to be the leader of a country, and this is why I refer to the Caribbean elites and our political leadership as a kakistocracy. And the term kakistocracy is interpreted as leadership or government by the least capable and least qualified people. And that is what it is.
Right.
To adopt the kind of stringent position in support of the U.S. policy, when the U.S. have a history of betraying people, of inconsistent line. I mean, it's like if you read some of the Native American stories, like in one of the books, Wounded Knee, in which I think Sitting Bull said the white man, basically the American white man, signed 1,000 treaties and broke 999. You know,
Yeah.
so for you to believe that the United States is interested in democracy in Venezuela when it is conducting and leading a genocide in Gaza, when it is supporting autocratic and dictators in Saudi Arabia where they're chopping people's head off, and Kuwait and United Arab Emirates, for you to believe that that they're trying to solve a problem of democracy and drug running is naive and stupid. That's why I said this is because I'm ignorant. And those of I have seen some political scientists in Trinidad. It is ignorance. I can only assume that these people are coming from a position of absolute ignorance, you know.
Yes,
And
yes.
relative to the situation with CARICOM, right? It is not the first time that the opposition has shown a disinclination to engage CARICOM. In fact, one of the statements I think to his discredit, Pandey made when he was prime minister was, I can't paraphrasing here, that he doesn't see why we should be burdened with CARICOM and Grenada and St. Vincent and St. Lucia. Why don't we, engage and seek to develop better relations with Suriname and Guyana? And everybody knows what that means. These are co-ethnics in the majority.
Right,
And
right,
so, in my view, that is one of the factors that has influenced the behavior of this current prime minister and government to CARICOM. You
right,
know,
right,
it
right,
has put us in a very bad light. And one of the things I think people don't understand is this. Trinidad is what, 10 miles at the furthest point from Venezuela.
right, right,
If there was going to be a war, what do you think is going to happen? There will be floodgates of refugees coming across the border,
right,
possibly
right,
armed to the teeth, which is
right,
going to transform Trinidad and Tobago. The other
right,
thing is a fundamental in diplomacy, what people call the good neighbor policy. You always try to have good relations with your nearest neighbor.
right,
In addition to that, Trinidad and Venezuela have had a long history of people moving across the border. Look, you from South, right? Some years ago, I
yeah,
went to visit a friend in Icacos, in Cedros, and he took me to Icacos.
yeah,
To a friend, a relative in Icacos. So I was speaking with the guy, and so I asked, the guy told me something, and I said, so when last you went to San Fernando? He said, boy, me I go to San Fernando in 10 years. I said, so where you do shop? He said, I shop in Pedernales and Birria and Peter. He said, I get nice Banlon jersey and thing down there. You know, so you have had this back and forth. No, you have
yeah,
also had contraband across the border.
right, right,
Like you have contraband between Canada and the US,
right,
right?
right, right.
So people go to Venezuela and they go and buy pig and they buy birds and parrots. But this is a
Yeah,
trade. Look,
yeah,
my mother
ah,
is 90 odd years
yeah,
and we are from Guayagüe. And she said when they were children, the indigenous people from Guyana used to come across in the dugouts, the canoes, and
right,
sell
right,
birds and wild animals to the people in Miara and
right,
Guayagüe. So
right,
we
right.
have had this thing for the longest while.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
to adopt this hostile position
yeah,
on
yeah,
Venezuela in support of the U.S. Destabilization and regime overthrow attempts. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make
Yeah,
any
yeah,
sense,
yeah,
and it's stupid.
yeah.
You know.
And when I think of parang music from
Well,
Venezuela,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, which is something we inherited between
from
the
Venezuela,
relationship
right?
between the people of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Listen, man, thank you very much, my friend. You be well, and I hope to talk with you again on a further issues that do come up in the domain. All right?
All right. Thank you very much.
You're
All right.
welcome.
We want peace. We don't want war.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
I've
right.
been speaking with Ako Mutota, who is a community leader and activist and an advocate for social justice and regional community. This is Von Martin. Caribbeana continues.
Thank you, Vaughn.
All right.